Hello and welcome to another episode of the Renewable Energy Movement. This episode will certainly be in season 2. I might have recorded a few episodes previously where I didn't give such introduction, but for this one I can be sure. Today's guest is Moritz Duhm. Moritz is currently regional manager onshore for wind and PV at ENERGTRAG. Thanks for being here, Moritz.
Thanks for the invitation, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Was the pronunciation of the name okay?
Oh, that was quite okay. Yeah.
Good. It's I've recorded many episodes with many different nationalities, and yeah, I'm sure I butcher some more than others, but glad to hear. Moritz, like as ever, we like to start at the beginning of your journey into renewables. Let's say, maybe you can take us back to that moment and how it happened and how you got started.
Yeah, it was quite funny and kind of by accident because I studied diploma geography in Hamburg. And my minor subjects were economics and Latin America studies, so not really a lot to do with renewable energies, but it also was in a time when renewable energies, were not such a promise of careers. I think very little people just focused on educating themselves or academical careers focusing on renewable energies. So most of the people working in that industry had kind of a spontaneous, idea or made their way just by training on the job. And then we had a stag night with my roommate. He was about to marry, and a friend of his. I was talking with him, we had some beer and we started a conversation, and he was like, well, you're just the perfect guy for project management, wind energy onshore. And I was like, what is it? And how is it like? What do project managers in wind onshore do? And then he started describing the job. And back in that times, it was just the whole project cycle, starting with acquisition activities and then the whole permitting process. So it was quite diverse, quite challenging, and very interesting because it was, to me, the perfect mixture between being in the office, being outside in the field, being in touch with really different kind of persons, from the landowner to the lawyer to the mayor to whatever, community councils, and the structure of working kind of independently within a company, because you're owner of your project. You're like a small company managing that project within a company, and that rate of independent work seemed very attractive to me. And then I finished my studies. I wrote my diploma thesis on Kyoto mechanisms. It's about compensation of emissions, and clean development mechanism is another mechanism of imitating emissions here and compensating them there in South America. And that was my diploma thesis. So that was my first touch point with renewable energies, because there were a lot of renewable energy projects. And then I simply started applications. Finally started my first job beginning of 2013 when I started with Procon.
Interesting. So it was a conversation, maybe a drunken conversation on a stag night that pushed you in that direction.
Not too drunk, because we did a hike. We were in Bavaria and we went up a mountain, but we were already in a very good mood. So, but I remembered the next day, and it inspired me that way that I kept track, if you want. So,
was Procon the company that this guy worked for? Did he introduce you in, or was it something?
At that time, he worked for another company, and he really made career. He is kind of CEO today. And he's still with that company. It's located further down south.
Nice, interesting. So straight from university, first job into renewables, and been there since. So how was your time at Procon? What was your remit, and what area were you working in?
Well, I was the greenhorn there. I was very young. I was, as you say, straight from university. I did several things before, but that was more like a student job turning into a steady contract. That had nothing to do with renewables. It was just soccer. Then it became some reduction. But basically, it was my first real job that I choose. And I was responsible, as most persons that started in the industry at that time, responsible for acquisition of lands, trying to negotiate contracts with landowners. And I really liked that. I went to all the different departments of Lower Saxony and tried to secure lands. But the problem at that time was that it was, just the time before the insolvency of Procon. It was already in the press, it was already in the media, so it was quite tough. And only 8 months later, Procon declared insolvency. And then we're stuck in that situation because we were not even allowed to do a business trip before getting approval to activate the related costs. That was why I decided quickly to leave Procon, because I was so young and I was really motivated and I didn't want to feel, being trapped in that vacuum. And then I started with ENERGTRAG in Bremen. And the position there was called project coordinator, and you were responsible for the whole project from acquisition until receiving the permit and later financing of the project, construction of the project, not as the main responsible project manager any longer, but as, the nexus of the project, because we were the ones that negotiated every contract, that knew every stakeholder in the project. So we always remained kind of a very important hub within the project. And then also even M&A activities. ENERGTRAG decided to sell the project. We were also involved for the planning and permitting part of due diligence and stuff. So that was, I've been there for 9 years, and that was really, really interesting. I learned a whole lot because of all the responsibility we had, project economic viability calculation and contract negotiation. And the last 2 years, I was then responsible for the Lower Saxony team as regional manager. So that was, in brief, my first 10 years in the industry.
Yeah, nice. Did you move location between Procon and ENERGTRAG, or did you stay?
I studied in Hamburg and lived in Hamburg when I was working with Procon, and then I went back to Bremen to work with ENERGTRAG. And Bremen is also the city where I grew up. So it was not my, I didn't feel I need to go back to the city where I grew up. It was more by accident that ENERGTRAG offered that job. I had 2 opportunities. Another one in Wiesbaden with Abo Energy today, Abo Wind back in that days. But I decided for Bremen because I've always been located in the north and my whole social network is here, my activities.
Yeah, nice. And like you say, that was quite a long stint at ENERGTRAG. You mentioned you went in as a project coordinator. Just talk us through a little bit your journey within ENERGTRAG, the promotions that you might have had and things like that.
I think it was quite a classic career, if you want so, because, you start with smaller tasks and smaller responsibility. Also, the first activities within ENERGTRAG were land securing activities, and I did that quite successful. And then I took over first project responsibility. And that really meant to develop a project from the scratch, because in that times, it was another situation. It was not that you had, drafts of designated areas. So a lot of published maps showing potential designated areas. It was more white mapping. We tried to identify areas that match all the criteria that the responsible planning authority would apply later on. So we tried to anticipate the criteria, like distance to housing, or distance to railway, or distance to whatever, lakes, rivers, I don't know. That is what you do within a white mapping. And then you try to convince the landowners that they sign contracts with you, and then you try to promote exactly that area at the responsible authorities so that they would later on display that area in their official planning. So there was way more uncertainty when you did land securing. Also less competition, but also less certainty. So that was how I started. And then I developed my first project successfully. Developing a project was different from how it is today in most companies, because we didn't have that division of labor. By no means. We were responsible for everything. So that means asking for offers from service providers, from environmental experts, or even identifying them, because it was not that you entered the internet and there was like a list of offices with good references. You had to figure out who fits for this project, who is the one expert that the responsible authority will accept, and like that. And it took years to develop these projects, because you were always waiting for the public planning processes to finalize the designated areas so that you could ask the building authority for a permit, or the emission authority for a permit. And I did that for 2 or 3 times. And of course, as you keep on working with the company for several years, you get quite a good network. If you do a good job, you also get recognition, and you become part of some working groups or some minor decision boards, and people learn about your expertise and about your qualities. And then we had some internal changes, and then it hit me when our regional manager was promoted to the next higher level, if you want so, of responsibility. We didn't have that within ENERGTRAG. They don't have very precise description of positions. That's why I'm hustling a little bit to describe it. But then I became regional manager for the first time I think beginning of 2021. So yeah, probably like 5 years ago now.
I'll ask you a bit about your managerial journey in a minute, because I think you've been a team lead manager since. But I want to just quickly go back to those first 7 years or so at Energy Contour. How did the market change in that time? You just mentioned a little bit about the way of securing projects was different, but that's quite a long period to go through some peaks and troughs within the German market.
Yeah, when I started with Energy Contour, that was I think April 2014 or so, or March. We still had the old mechanism of feed-in tariffs, where you secured the tariff by receiving the building permit, and then you had a small digression, and the tariff was finally fixed when you had commissioning date of the wind turbine. Then the tariff was fixed, but you didn't have to apply for a tariff within a tender. That changed at the 1st of January 2017, and that was really a change of paradigms, because the building permit was only the ticket that you needed to participate in the tender. You had no security about the tariff that you would win. You could not anticipate. You had, of course, a highest bid possible, but you also had restrictions in terms of volume. That's how a tender works. If it is oversubscribed, then you have pressure on the prices, on the tariffs. If it's undersubscribed, you will most likely receive the highest bid allowed. Had some special rules for so-called citizens companies that wanted to deploy wind energy turbines that participated in the auctions. They had some privileges. So if you had a group of people originating from a certain department wanting to deploy a wind turbine, then they could participate in a tender. But the big exception was, first, they didn't need a permit. Everybody else, economy, every project developer needed a permit to be allowed to participate. They didn't. And second, no matter how high or low their bid was, they always received the highest bid awarded in the auction. So they had kind of a uniform pricing mechanism, and all the others had a paid as bid mechanism in the auction. So that meant, let's say, the highest bid allowed was 7.5 cent per kilowatt, or 75 euros per megawatt hour. They could go for, let's say, a cent or 40 euro. And in the end, the highest bid awarded in the auction was 7.2. Then they automatically jumped onto 7.2. You understand that?
Yeah, I think so.
And the interesting thing about that, why I'm mentioning, is because, of course, what you will do is try to place your bid strategically. You want to be below the highest bid awarded, because in the end, I will receive the highest bid awarded. But then something terrible happened. Many, many projects, they pretended to be citizen-driven projects, but in the end, it was not a citizen company that was owner of the project, but it was, I don't know who it was. And everybody did that strategic bidding. So they placed quite low bids, not expecting that in the end 90% or 95% of the whole volume would be awarded to very low bids. That meant the highest bid was not 7.2 or whatever, but the highest bid in the end was 4.2 or 3.6 or I don't know. So that was a terrible crisis, because by the tariffs awarded, you were not able to realize the projects. It was not possible. It was a gambling they did, and the bet didn't work out in the end.
So people were winning bids on things they didn't want to win on. Is that correct?
Exactly. They were expecting, with a low bid in the end, will jump up to to the last bid awarded, and that will be very comfortable for me.
Yeah.
But many people had the idea to find the legal gap within the new law, within the new construction, to apply as a citizens company. And that was the problem. And then we lost 2017 nearly completely. And that was also the time when Senvion, the turbine constructing company, declared insolvency, and when Enercon had serious problems. And then you had a heavy decrease in wind turbine prices. And then that was very funny because that was followed by a time where the industry was very well off, because everybody who was not awarded within 2017 in the first rounds of the auction, Federal Republic of Germany corrected the legal breaches within the mechanism. And so you were able to receive bids that were high enough to realize projects. But you're also able in 2017 to sign TSAs with the wind turbine producers for very, very small prices. And then that was followed by a very successful time with very high margins within the project. So just to describe that, everybody was very afraid at the change 2016, 2017, because nobody knew the new regime of awarding tariffs within a tender. And the start was terrible, really terrible, because nobody got awarded. And those that were awarded could not realize their projects. And then from 2018, especially 2019, you were able to do some very economic projects, very interesting project, because also interest rates dropped at that time. Maybe you remember you had very low interest rates, around 1.5% for non-recourse financing. So many factors that played together.
I wasn't aware at all of. Was that only for onshore wind in Germany, or was that for all
onshore? Onshore.
Okay.
Well, I don't know how exactly the regime was for offshore wind at that time. All eyes were focused on wind onshore. And you also have to know, of course, that in that times, it was also very strong up and down in terms of acceptance and political support. That changed a lot, Then you had Fukushima, then the support was there. Then after a few years, it was again, well, we don't want so many wind turbines. That's not the solution. We need, gas turbines, or we need to go back to nuclear power. So it was always a change. We were pioneers, and we were really fighting for each turbine and for each area that was supposed to be designated by authorities.
Yeah, I mean that's a common theme, isn't it? Through the evolution of renewables, country by country, at any given time, that particular administration regime, whatever you want to call it, can put blockers on or can slow things down and can speed things up. But I talk about this topic a lot on with guests on this podcast. That's it's only ever a small dent in the greater journey. Yeah. In 100 years' time, renewables will be significantly greater than it is now. If anything, the world will run on renewables, and you won't even look at those small dents. Nobody will talk about the Trump administration when it comes to renewables in 100 years' time, but it feels so drastic at the time, actually, for given countries and markets.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the start of last year, leading up to the elections in Germany, I felt the significant turbulence in the market as well.
Yeah, it is though. That's true.
Cool. So just going back a little bit, that was really interesting. I wasn't aware of that at all. You became a divisional manager, a manager for your region, which you are now essentially an expert in. You've been working for 10, 11 years specifically in that area. How do you find your first kind of foray into management, particularly in a time when I imagine everything was like this on Teams calls and meetings, that you weren't in the office?
Well, I think when I started, that was, you think 2021? Yeah, we just started to go back to the office. Well, but that was not really my concern. My concern was more, how will it be like? How will it feel like to be one project coordinator, let's say out of 6 or out of 7, and then all of a sudden became their boss? It never was my understanding, like being a boss, but I had a little bit the fear that it might be a bit more lonely if you have that position, because of course you need to treat everybody equal. You cannot just, grab that colleague and say, well, about this or that guy or that person or that girl, I don't know, whatever. Just talk about colleagues is not possible anymore. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that you really have to be very careful, because you, at the same time, you might speak as a colleague or as a friend, but also as a boss. That challenge was kind of my concern, will I be able to maintain stable, friendly relations with my colleagues and my friends. It was not my concern that I might not be able to handle the job and the expectations the higher management had, because I knew all the persons. I knew they trusted me, and I didn't even have really an application process. They were just like, if you want to do it, then you have the job. And I was like, yeah, I want to do it, because I also didn't want an external solution for our team. So that was also a motivation. And I wanted to make that step, because after 7 years as a project manager, of course, every project is different and you never stop learning. But for me, I felt that it was the time to act more on a macro level and, not spending my time with going so deep into all the details of every single specific project. It was quite tempting and attractive to me to work in that position where I coordinate things on another level, where I'm responsible for a budget, where I have responsibility for my team. So I really wanted to do that. I was not afraid of the tasks and the responsibilities, but more about social issues.
So you were essentially as a group of peers.
Yeah.
And then you were elevated to be like the leader. I thought, it's tricky, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Only when I left ENERGTRAG, then I became aware of how important that time was, also in terms of learning about the industry, about the whole business case of wind energy onshore in Germany. And yeah, I think it was really the perfect place to spend the first decade to be educated in a very holistic way.
Yeah, and I think looking back at that, at the time it was very similar in my industry actually when I first got into management. But at the time you're very nervous, right? But looking back, it's a perfect stepping stone to then when you do go on to your career, you've actually had your exposure to management with people that like you, that people that trust you, that people you get on well with. Yeah.
Respect you, that know about your abilities. You don't have to every step that you make is a proof of your quality, because they know already.
Did you grow the team at any point then, or were you always with the same members you had? Did you have to go externally and do any hiring at all?
Well, not really. I think we grew by 1 or 2 persons, but ENERGTRAG had, and I think still has, quite strict rules on how and when to grow teams, because they really have financial discipline, which is very good and which is probably helping them a lot at the moment. But it was not that if you saw an opportunity, then you decided to hire 3 or 4 new people. We had a team which was in total, had a size of, I think, 15 team members. I don't remember exactly whether including working students or not. And then we had 1 or 2 freelancers working for us in land securing. But yeah, that was pretty much the size of the team. Yeah.
And then how did your next move come about? Because you've obviously, like you say, 9-10 years is a really long stint at the same company, and you've grown with it as well. How did the move come?
Well, the move came when by the end of 2021, the green, red and yellow government, the German Ampel-Koalition, took over responsibility. And that was another milestone for the industry, I think, because they really streamlined a whole lot of processes that had been discussed before, but they agreed on some very important laws, and as a result, they speeded up permitting processes. They speeded up designation of areas, and for the first time, they defined an amount of areas in percentage of the surface of a department or of a community or whatever, and they defined a date by which the areas had to be officially decided and agreed on. Then they also boosted the volume of the tender, and that gave a lot of certainty to the market, and that made the market very attractive for new players, European utilities like, let's say, Électricité de France, like Iberdrola, like Engie, like, I don't know, many other examples. Some of them, Statkraft from Norway, some of them had already business on the German market, but not necessarily on project development up front or let's say from scratch, the whole project circle in Germany. And they started to establish it, plus a lot of private equity that before used to buy turnkey projects. And they said, well, we have so many experience now. We have a significant pipeline that we bought within the last decade or 2 decades. And now we can start our own project development here in Germany. And at the same time, you also had a boost in PV and solar. So the whole branch, let's say megawatt scale renewables in Germany, just exploded. And
Yeah.
then you had huge company, global players that entered the market, and they needed professionals. And they started to offer for us at that time incredible salaries, potentially incredible opportunities. And I was quite resilient to that. And it was also when it started that headhunters, recruiters called you or wrote you. It was Xing at that time, and later it was LinkedIn, and your phone rang and you were like, your landline, you were like, yeah, hi, I got your number. I wanted to ask for you. It was like that, it was new to us. And I was quite resistant, I didn't really feel attracted by that from the first moment. But then, it started developing, and there were also things that I was kind of unhappy with within ENERGTRAG, because my impression at that time was that they were really missing huge opportunities, because, as I said before, they were not willing to invest in more stuff, to grow a bigger team, to give us things we urgently needed at that time. I understand better today why they didn't, but still, from my point of view at that
Yeah.
time, I said, well, I want a change, and I really want to be part of that dynamic movement that I'm seeing now for the renewables in Germany. And then there were several interesting positions. In the end, I decided for a position within Iberdrola, which is also a huge company that had already offshore business in Germany at that time, and decided to establish onshore business in Germany. And then I was head of business development, they call it, but it was more head of project development. Main responsibility was to grow 4 regional offices, 4 regional teams, and to establish the company in terms of wind and solar PV projects in Germany. That was
We
the
are really getting to this period now where Germany is like complete boom, and also probably, the most lucrative country in Europe at this time for both wind and PV. And I can imagine, if you obviously were working for a very financially astute company, but you're getting all of these calls, you're seeing everybody else talk about all of these growth plans. Yeah, I can imagine it was what turned your head. And how did the build go with Iberdrola? How far did you get with that?
Well, not too far, because I realized very quickly that working in such a company, which is a global player, which is SAP driven or SAP governed, if you want so, is not giving me the space and the freedom I need to design onshore projects, because processes from my point of view were not working well with the demand such onshore projects have, because they are really very heterogeneous by contracts that you have to sign. As I said before, by service providers that you have to contract, you have a whole lot of small things to do, and that does not go well with structures that were established to organize a global player, because you need to take decisions on the level where you need the decision, and not to go to Spain to get a minor decision approved.
Yeah.
There were a lot of processes that I was not happy with. And at the same time, they were growing the onshore business. So many structures were not yet established in Germany, always needed approval from Spain. And to me, it became clear that the contrast of philosophy of the two companies, ENERGTRAG and Iberdrola, the contrast was just too strong, and the cut was too hard, because in ENERGTRAG you could decide almost everything by yourself if you had good arguments and if it was economically working or helping the company. And in Iberdrola, you could not take one single step without explaining yourself into 3 different directions, and then wait for approval, not only from that person, but from 3 persons above. And
Yeah.
so I decided to step out again, and I also decided to take a step back. I was very aware of that decision. It was not by a lack of opportunities, but it was just that I felt that high level management is not what I want, for at least not now, for my career, for my family, for my personal well-being, was not the way I wanted to work. And so I decided to take a job again as a regional manager in Lower Saxony, because I really know the department very well. And I had very, very good conversations with my actual boss now, with the division manager. I started with Iberdrola in May 2023. and resigned for the first time by January 2024. And then we agreed to continue collaboration for another 6 or 7 months because they also asked me to stay for some more months to finish some things. So I had resigned and I didn't have a new job. I just knew that the market is very dynamic. It would not be a problem to receive a new job. So I was quite free when I talked to my actual division manager, and it was really a match. Then I started in August 2024 with ENERGTRAG, and I'm still very happy there. It's again totally different environment, different company, but it feels like that I found the place where I want to be for the next years. And that was also my intention. My intention was not to, make more money, make more career and becoming managing director or CEO as fast as possible, but to find a good balanced way of working with challenging, interesting tasks and a good team within a responsible company. And this is what I feel that I found with ENERGTRAG. So I'm quite happy at the moment.
Yeah, good to hear. And I mean, I guess you mentioned right at the beginning of the conversation that what you liked about the industry was the ability to kind of run your own projects within a company. So you go to a big bureaucratic organization like Iberdrola, I can imagine you had that kind of freedom that all you've ever known taken away from you. Yeah, and I guess you've got a bit of that back now with ENERGTRAG.
I mean, I was by my position, I was quite higher than I was with ENERGIEkontor, but by the level of freedom of taking decisions, not even close to be comparable.
Yeah, very interesting. And what is your you mentioned you're looking after, is it PV and wind or just onshore wind in Lower Saxony?
Yeah, in the theory it's both PV and wind, but practically it's 90% wind because PV with the current tariffs and the current market is not really economically viable in Lower Saxony. There might be exceptions, but not as a large scale megawatt daily business. You really need to find the perfect match with very close grid connection and very low land leases. Then it might work out, but not as a 50-50 strategy with wind.
Yeah. And how do you find the market now? Firstly, it's changed a little bit to a couple of years ago, of course. And then what are your kind of projections for the future for German onshore wind?
Well, very, very interesting questions. I could go on talking about that because I talk a lot about that with my team, with colleagues and the different rounds at ENERGTRAG, but also with other friends that are working in the industry. I think the simplest formula is that the industry at the moment is becoming kind of victim of its own success. Because if you want to put it very simple, then the only thing that changed is that the tariffs that are awarded in the tenders dropped significantly, caused by oversubscription of the tenders because there are so many permits. That means the industry is very, very, very successful at the moment. And everybody, was screaming like the last 1 or 2 years was celebrating the most successful years of their history. But apparently people and managers forgot how a tender works and that things will change. And all of a sudden they were confronted with a situation where they had to reevaluate their pipeline because they were not allowed to calculate with or whatever 7-cent bid award, which is then multiplied by the correction factor, but let's say 7-cent bid price. They had to take 6-cent bid price. And then they saw the last tender and the highest bid awarded was 6.12 and the lowest bid awarded was 5.8. The last tender, if we take just a quick view on the last tender, that was in November 2025. The next will be 1st of February 2026. The November tender was oversubscribed by the factor 2.36. And the volume of the next round in February is 3,500 almost megawatts. That means it is clear already now, only by the overlap of the November tender, that the February tender will be oversubscribed by 1,260 megawatts, something like that. Plus all the permits that project developers received in December 2025, because they are allowed to additionally participate in the February tender. So the pressure will remain terribly high, and we will probably see prices clearly below 6 cents per kilowatt hour. But that started already a longer time ago. I think first oversubscription was in August 2024. So mid of 2024, that dynamic started. And if you have to reevaluate, recalculate your project pipeline, then you might figure out that some equity, some cash is missing. But you need cash, of course, to boost your project pipeline. And you also need cash, you need liquidity to implement non-recourse financing for the projects that you want to realize. So what do you do to balance your equity? You might decide to sell a project. But if many companies decide to sell a project or two or three, and other companies that had, let me call it, liquid gigawatt dreams when they entered the German market, and they now see, well, we don't even have significant pipeline. We cannot even participate in the tenders by now. So what can we do? We sell our pipeline to somehow cap the damage.
Yeah.
Because we invested a lot of money. So what you see is that on the M&A market, you have a lot of different projects in different development stages. And that market somehow switched from a seller's market to a buyer's market within weeks. That happened already a few months ago. So you cannot compensate lower tariffs by selling projects to sufficient or adequate price. And you cannot really increase the price in the tender because the volume is simply too high and oversubscription is there. And then it becomes very, very difficult to find a way out. And so I think that you could say that currently there's a lot of pressure in the market, which does not mean that the market or the industry is not successful. It's the opposite. It's very successful, but it was also, from my point of view, clearly overheated because everybody entered the German market. If you had, made a calculation in 2023 or 24, putting together all the gigawatt objectives of all the companies, then you would probably have, I don't know, a factor of X in terms of what was foreseen by the government.
Yeah, and what's actually realized. Yeah, and we one of our Germany's probably our biggest market has been for the last 5 years. Our second market now, a very close second, is Italy. And Italy is in 2 years, let's say, behind where Germany was.
Yeah.
So all of these problems, they probably want to call them problems, or this like balancing tightrope area that we're in Germany is going to come further down the line in Italy as well. And we're in that phase where everyone is projecting all of these gigawatts, projecting all of this expansion. It's impossible for it all to be realized. Yeah.
Yeah. My assumption is pretty much that what we're seeing currently is that consolidation phase that I expected already in 2022, because it was clear it cannot work out for everybody. So not everybody can work successfully and establish business in the German market. And I think those companies that are pioneers, that are on the German market for 20 years or even longer, which operate wind farms by themselves, because that gives substantial and strong financial backing, or at least continuous income. You're not so dependent on developing projects because you might sell them turnkey. And on the other hand, those companies that rely 100% on income of the selling of turnkey projects, they will be in trouble, or they are in trouble. And also new companies that have not yet managed to successfully realize their first projects, they're also in trouble. So I think there will be mergers, there will be pipelines that are sold. And of course, there will be survivors, because by the volume, the market is still attractive.
Yeah.
There were a lot of hirings in the last 2 or 3 years. So probably many people that recently started within the industry will find new orientation in their working life. Not everybody will remain in this industry. And of course, I think that all these technologies that you need in addition to the traditional assets, wind and power producing assets, power plants, which is especially storage technologies, battery, but maybe also hydrogen. Maybe it takes some more years, but then you also have heat, power to heat. And I think all these hybrid usage of green electrical energy will become more and more attractive and more important, because, as you said before, I think the point of no return is reached already.
Yeah.
It will not happen that we go back 100% to fossil fuels, gas, nuclear power. It's not manageable. It's not feasible. and it also doesn't make sense economically. So
Yeah.
I think it will go on, but the consolidation phase will be tough for some companies, will be also tough for some established players that
Yeah.
were growing too fast and too strong within the last years. But in the end, I think it will be a healthy process because salaries might go back to a normal level, and also competition might go back to a adequate level. Competition is good, but sometimes it's too hard, because it also drives prices. It drives land leases. What do companies do now? They maybe try to find solutions with the landowners, because some years ago the situation was simply different, and you cannot implement projects as you negotiated them years ago. Nobody wants to do that, but many have to do.
Yeah, I some great observations there. But I think in regards to the kind of salary and pricing points, I think we've reached the peak in Germany anyway. I don't think it's going to go any further now. I think it will slide back into normality, depending on how it goes. Like you say, it's not just a certain size of company are at risk. It could, depending on where they're at with their projects or where they're at with their life cycle, could hamper companies differently. But Moritz, thanks so much for coming on. It was really an expert view on the German onshore wind market, and particularly your region as well. You've spent the vast majority working purely in Lower Saxony, and I think that shows. Yeah, we will put all of Moritz's kind of social LinkedIn and connections in the description below. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Moritz.
Thanks a lot for having me, Tom. Very interesting for me as well, and very good talking to you.
Awesome.